I noticed problems. I noticed shoddy police work. They'd be coming into work late, hanging around the station.
It began as a minor local difficulty. A Garda sergeant in a small town complaining about policing standards in his district.
He just could see all the things that were going wrong.
Those members not going to calls and not investigating the incidents.
His complaints were dismissed and belittled. But he wouldn't be silenced. And as time went on, he found wrongdoing on a grand scale.
Shocking revelations of incompetence, which ultimately led to people being murdered.
Over the course of a decade, his battle to be heard would spiral into the most toxic political issue of the era.
All of those things that are levelled against their fellow officers, frankly, I think it's quite disgusting.
It would topple senior ministers, taint high-flying careers and plunge successive governments into crisis.
Allegations of Garda Maurice McCabe.
But it could not be contained.
The Minister for Justice has this evening resigned from the government.
And it would lead to an unprecedented public inquiry into an extraordinary allegation. Could the apparatus of the state have colluded to destroy a man simply for blowing the whistle on wrongdoing?
There was loads of times that I felt frightened. I was afraid that they'd do something to hurt him.
The Commissioner, he said to Maurice McCabe, fiddles with kids.
I just said, you bastard, to use my children.
Allegations of child sex abuse against Garda whistleblower Maurice McCabe, 2 months
I grew up half a mile from this house at Tonham in Nugent, County Cavan. We owned the Sheen and Shamrock Hotel, owned by my father.
I built the hotel in '61. I got the idea of doing something for myself. And he gave me the green light for a small hotel of 13 bedrooms. So I kept building on to it then after that. The kids and all grew up in the hotel, and I had my wife Peggy, Lord of mercy on her. It was a very success story at the time, when the majority of young people at my age were taking the boat to America at the time. I wasn't inclined to go down that road.
I remember a detective in Cavan, Billy O'Neill, he was a sergeant. He'd come out nearly every weekend just for a chat for an hour. He had a blue Ford Cortina unmarked, and I'd sit into it. I was 12 and 13, and he'd always say, oh, someday you'll grow up to be a guard. The career guidance teacher would ask me what I wanted to be, and I said a guard.
I was doing my damnedest to stop him. Maybe because I was going to miss him in the hotel, I don't know. But I certainly was doing my damnedest anyway that he didn't join the police. So,
The Taoiseach condemned the murder of the 2 Gardaí and have extended deep sympathy to their relatives. Here's Donald Kelly of our political
stationed in Castlereagh for the past year. This evening, the massive search operation raided the Bank of Ireland branch in the town and got away with a sum of money believed to be about...
I remember it coming on the news that after a robbery, and the 2 guards were shot dead in Roscommon, I think it was.
An airport helicopter joined in the search.
And I asked my father if we could go to the funeral.
We went to the funeral anyway over in Roscommon, I remember it well.
The attendants included the Garda Commissioner and other senior officers.
I just wanted to go. And I suppose it was building up for what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I was going to make sure I was going to be a guard.
With a single-minded determination to resist and expose those who were engaged in a conspiracy against the police.
I applied back in '83, and I passed the exam, I passed the interview, I went for the medical, and I was 1/8 of an inch too short. And I slept on a board for about 3 to 4 months. If you lie on a hard surface, it may extend your spinal cord and it may give you the height. I made the height, and I went to Templemore. Once we arrived, we were all dying for the uniform. So then we got it a week later. Once I put it on, I knew I was a guard. You could look yourself in the mirror and say, wow, I'm a guard. And I was, even though I was only a week in the premises. I'm a guard. And we had our breakfast at 8:15 in the canteen. We had to be clean shaven and our shoes had to be gleaming. Our uniform, it gathered dust and we all used to brush each other down. Many of the person had to step forward. If the back of the jacket had a hair on it, they got sanctioned. And it was awful. I never got sanctioned once, never. It was real army life, and it stood to us. It stood to me anyway. And it's a pity that went, because it was good for us. We had class every morning in relation to law. Then the afternoon was extremely tough, but I was light and I was able to do all the exercises. But the 20 in our class, that's who you really gelled with, and we had fantastic crack, and we were all good friends.
My name is Maurice McCabe from Mount Nugent, County Cavan, and I'm going to Drogheda, and I would like to thank the boys for putting up with me for the past 6 months.
The passing out was fantastic. And then we met the families after the march.
He did us proud, in fairness, he did us proud. Our attitude changed to him. We were glad then that he was right, seemed to be on the right road, and he did what he wanted to do, and we backed him then from then on.
Maurice McCabe had gone to extreme lengths to fulfil his dream of becoming a guard. He could never have anticipated where that dream would take him 30 years later.
The Disclosures Tribunal, investigating allegations of a senior Garda smear campaign against the whistleblower Sergeant Maurice McCabe, is hearing its first...
By the time the Disclosures Tribunal into allegations that senior Gardaí had conducted an orchestrated smear campaign to discredit him began hearing evidence, Maurice McCabe was a national figure. Hailed as a hero by many who saw his battle for vindication as a portrait in courage. For some of his colleagues, though, he was a troublemaker and a traitor, a disaffected cop who turned a personal grudge into a national crusade. Over the next 12 months, the Supreme Court Justice Peter Charlton would have to decide where the truth lay. This was all a far cry from the early days of his career as a young, enthusiastic Garda.
Maurice lived for his job. 24/7, anybody could ask him to do anything at any time and he was gone.
I love the guards. I lived the guards. I slept the guards. It was a great job.
And even when we would be out somewhere, he would still always be a guard. Like if he came across somebody that he thought was drunk while they were driving, he couldn't just go away from it. He couldn't just forget he didn't see it. And that was a bit aggravating, actually.
I was stationed in Drogheda when I met Lorraine. It was my brother Declan arranged a blind date. Declan is married to Lorraine as well.
I've known Lorraine all my life. We grew up in the same town, in Arva, which is about 20 miles from where we're both living, next door to each other now.
Lorraine asked me would I go on a blind date with Declan's brother, and I said I'd think about it. Couldn't be the week coming because he was gone to Lourdes with his mother, and I thought, oh, gone to Lourdes with him, seriously. She said, don't be so picky.
It was in September '87. We met in Dublin, and we ended up at Bad Bob's. And we drove home to Lorraine's apartment, and I walked up to the door, And I said goodnight to her, and I got back to the car. I jumped the hedge in excitement, and I said to Declan, "That's the girl I'm going to marry."
You've been out shopping?
We had a big wedding. There was 120 at it. A great day.
Not that I didn't enjoy it. I don't like being the centre of attention. I couldn't wait to get out.
I said to her afterwards, I said, I think the biggest smile on your face that day was when you went up and you got changed into your going away outfit. And she said, definitely, that's it, get me out of here. It just wasn't her thing.
Hannah was first born, and then Neve is next. And then we've Robert, and then we've got Alison, and then Tom is the baby. Maurice was great. He was a great father. He would have done nappies and feeds and all that sort of thing. He had no problem doing that.
As a rookie Garda, Maurice McCabe worked for short periods in Drogheda and Dundalk before spending 11 years on the ground in Ballyborough.
I went for the sergeant's exam because I kept being advised by colleagues to go for it. And I got promoted, and I went to Clonus then as a sergeant. And then at the end of 2004, there was a vacancy for the sergeant in charge in Ballyborough. I applied and got it.
I never wanted Maurice to go back to Ballyborough. I didn't think it was a good move. I thought, how do you go back to being sergeant in charge of somewhere where you were a Garda?
But I went back. Maybe I shouldn't. When I went back to Ballyborough, I noticed problems. I noticed shoddy police work. Certain members, they'd be coming into work late, hanging around the station, drinking tea the whole time, not going out on patrol. A certain element of guards, didn't come in for the weekend.
I think he put it down to just sloppiness and poor policing. I can remember the night a guard phoned him to tell him that there was a suicide and that there was things going on.
There was no sergeant working, I was told. So I decided that I'd drive over to the scene and investigate it. And I drove by the scene because I wanted just to go into the station and get my cap. I arrived at the scene. There was a male and female member of the guards who had arrived first. They came over to me to say that there was 3 off-duty guards there and that they were drunk and they were interfering with the scene. I could see that they were drunk, so I asked them to leave. When I was walking around at the side of the house, I noticed that they had the unmarked car with them. And I seen it driving off. I was amazed at that, because these 3 people were off duty and drunk, but yet they had access to an unmarked patrol car. I finished the suicide at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I went to a guard's house who had been at the scene with a colleague, and we had a cup of tea just to talk about it. We were all alarmed about the 3 members. So on the following morning, I rang a superintendent and I told him about it. All 3 were sanctioned and disciplined. And one of them, he was taken off a very elevated job and put back on the regular unit. And that colleague was the father of Miss D.
"11 months later, in December 2006, the girl who would come to be known as Miss D made a devastating allegation against Maurice McCabe.
It was the 8th of December, and I was due to go to Dublin with the kids shopping. I was only working a half day.
Maurice couldn't come with me because there was something going on in the station. And he said he'd meet me afterwards. So I went off with the 4 children.
I went into my superintendent, and she then told me that Miss D's father and mother had made a complaint at the Cavan station in relation to their daughter, and it was a complaint of sexual assault. I said, what? I sat down then at that stage because I was standing up. And she said, look, I feel I had to tell you. I stayed in silence, I think, in her office for a few minutes, and I left. So my biggest thing was, do I tell Lorraine? Do I ring her? We were all meeting in Blanchardstown that afternoon.
No doubt, there are white-faced people with anxious expressions forming at shopping centres with their Christmas wish lists.
I was in Blanchardstown walking around with the kids and Lorraine. I stayed back so they weren't able to see me.
And it was Hannah, who has special needs, said to me later on in the day, is Daddy okay? He's crying. And even at that stage, I didn't pass much heat.
We came home from Dublin that night and we put all the kids to bed, and I told her in the sitting room. And I broke down. She hugged me and she cried. And that's how I told her.
I knew it was wrong, but it doesn't make it any easier. I was afraid he'd take his own life. We told nobody all over Christmas. We had the Christmas party. We would have done everything that we'd normally have done. The rest is just a blank. I don't remember.
It completely changed our family life, completely. I didn't bat the kids ever again or wash them. I wouldn't be here if there was visitors with their children. I'd always have something to do or somewhere to go. I was interviewed in January 2007. I heard the detail. Miss D's statement alleged that when she was 6 years of age, she was playing in our house a game of hide and seek with me and my 2 other children when I leaned over her in a humping fashion. She then stated that when she was 12 or 13, she remembered this and she thought in her mind or classified it as a sexual act. And it was only when she was 14 she informed her parents that it was a sexual assault, and they reported it to Garda Síochána.
The allegation was fully investigated and a file went to the Director of Public Prosecutions. 4 months after the allegation was made, Maurice McCabe got a phone call.
It was the state solicitor in Cavan, and he told me that the file was back for the DPP, and he outlined the full direction from the DPP to me. What really stood out was they said there is not a case here of sexual assault or any assault at all, and I think that was key.
So there had been no crime?
No, there was no crime, no. And it questioned, I think, the credibility of Miss D. As I said, I was thrilled. That was it.
But that wasn't it. This dismissed sexual assault allegation would resurface years later when Maurice McCabe was a high-profile Garda whistleblower. When and why this happened would be one of the key questions explored by the Disclosures Tribunal. Senior Gardaí would maintain that the fallout from the original Garda investigation back in 2006 into Miss D's allegation changed the character of Maurice McCabe, and that this change in attitude sparked his subsequent series of complaints about Garda malpractice. But he rejects this completely. He says he complained about poor policing because of what he saw as a worrying slippage in standards.
I think the most serious thing was that there was members not going to calls and not investigating the incidents.
He just could see all the things that were going wrong. And his concern was just that the public weren't being served.
He felt that the younger guards weren't being properly supervised and weren't learning how things should be done, and that the culprits are getting away with stuff that they should be held accountable for.
At that stage, I suppose, I don't know if you can use the words, he became obsessive.
It was Crossan's pub assault. It was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. That's where a young fella went into the pub to have a drink, and he was assaulted inside the pub. Well, it was a nasty assault.
The probationer guard assigned to this case of violent assault didn't investigate it properly. To cover up his own failings, the guard asked the victim to withdraw charges, saying the case wouldn't stand up in court.
I have never seen that done before, and I just became afraid. It happened in my area. I was sergeant in charge of Bailieborough, and I reported that straight away. I needed help, but it wasn't there. There's no way I was going to stay a sergeant in charge. No way.
Maurice McCabe resigned his position as sergeant in charge and asked to be returned to ordinary policing on the basis that he couldn't stand over standards in the station.
I thought when I resigned as sergeant in charge that they'd bring me in and say, OK, Maurice, let's sort all this out. Let's see what's happening in the station. But the following day, I got a sealed envelope saying, oh, yeah, no problem, bye-bye. A few weeks after I left, I went to my solicitor, Sean Costello, just to make a complaint to Garda Síochána.
I probably was afraid that he was getting into deep water. He was just pushing things too far. It wouldn't be me. I would have walked away.
What I was hoping for is that the issues I reported would be investigated and that I'd get back into position sergeant in charge, and they'd say, yes, I was right to highlight these issues. If I had to know then what was facing me, oh, I would never have done it. Never.
In 2008, Maurice McCabe resigned his post as sergeant in charge and made an official complaint about policing standards in Bailieborough. An internal inquiry got underway. This became known as the Byrne-McGinn investigation after the two senior Gardaí who were in charge of it.
I was still in Bailieborough, and then it came out that I had made a complaint. Oh, I could see the reaction straight away. I went to work and half of the station wouldn't even look at me or speak to me.
I mean, he was completely out of favour in Cavan Monaghan at that stage. You know, people were avoiding him, and that was really tough in Lorraine as well. Because, you know, it's a small rural town and you're like to bump into people. And just get the whole vibe that you're being isolated. It was horrible.
We lost our friends. One particular, the thing that just sticks out in my head was another guard's family did the same classes as our kids. And that lady would park her car in a particular way that she wouldn't have to acknowledge me when I would come out. And if her husband was doing the classes, and he wouldn't lift his head when I'd be passing the car to wave or anything. And we would have gone out together quite regularly. And what had any of it got to do with me?
I couldn't stay there. So I went to Mullingar, into the traffic court. The whole word around the station is, oh, here's the fella that's coming, but he's dangerous. Now, I settled into Mullingar and I got on well with them. But I didn't care if the unit didn't come in. I wasn't taking on any issues with Mullingar, none.
The Byrne-McGinn internal investigation, set up to look into Maurice McCabe's complaints about policing standards in Ballyborough, was coming to an end. The report was never published, but McCabe was told that at least a third of his allegations were upheld. His colleagues would be told different.
Chief Superintendent Colin Rooney, who was over the Cavan Monaghan area, he sends around a circular saying, in relation to Sergeant Maurice McCabe's complaint for investigated, there was nothing found whatsoever. He actually went further than that and congratulated all the guards involved in the allegations for upholding the highest standards. I was stomached, couldn't believe it. I was named in the heading of it, and then I was named in the body, and it was allegations made by. Very low day for me at the time, very low day.
At the Disclosures Tribunal, the now retired Chief Superintendent Colin Rooney would apologise. He said this had been his understanding at the time, but he now accepted it was unwarranted.
It was a shocking document, and it took them 7 years to correct it. But the harm was done. The harm was done to me, you know?
The whole way he was treated, it broke him completely. He had built all of this up and he had shown them the hard evidence, but I think the penny dropped with him, that nothing was ever going to change.
After the humiliation of the Rooney circular, there would be whispers about the sergeant.
A colleague of mine in Cavan Monaghan, he rang me to say that there was a rumour that I left my wife. And he told me exactly who was saying the rumour, a guard. And I confronted him a few days afterwards. I seen him on the street. I pulled up and I told him, I haven't left my wife. He said, oh, somebody came into the station and told me that. I says, you should have checked it out before you spread it.
Somebody brought it to the attention of Maurice that there were nasty photographs posted on one of those social media sites. And he was given them, and they were awful.
There was 11 pictures of off-duty guards there in Ballyborough. They had a plastic rat, and it showed them sticking darts into it. And it also showed then obscene sexual gestures with the rat. And underneath the photographs was the word Maurice. Then there was a comment, cheese-eating rat bastard was underneath.
It just gave us a complete sense of the feeling towards him. And I can remember just being across the road and coming home one afternoon, just walking up the drive, and I'm thinking, God, like, you know, it's a lovely house, the gardens are lovely, everything looks lovely. If you only knew the turmoil that was inside.
I think it was the pile up of stuff that I decided I needed help. And I was with the doctor and he felt that I should go in somewhere for a while. I ended up going to John of God, which It's a psychiatric hospital in Dublin.
God, just the feeling of despair. When they take your phone and take your belt, and the door closed, and it was just awful.
It was very emotional, having to see Lorraine look back to Cavan on her own to look after the kids. I expected to be in there quite a while. Didn't sleep nearly for the whole night. Up the next morning. I had the family at home. I knew they needed me. I realised, no, this is no place for me. I'm not staying here. I went to a meeting with the psychiatrist. They tried to put a number of questions to me and asked me would I stay for a month. I said no. They kept asking me questions. I said, I'm not staying here, I'm going. I'm going in a half an hour. Back to my room, got my bag, and I suddenly realised I'm going to fight back.
Maurice McCabe turned to the Garda Confidential recipient, the official channel for Garda complaints. These allegations would go much further. He accused a number of senior officers of incompetence and corruption. In a major escalation, he also accused his Commissioner Martin Callanan of corruption for supporting the promotion of an officer he had complained about. 1 month later, he was subject to a disciplinary investigation. There is no evidence that these events were connected or that the disciplinary process was improper, but it greatly contributed to the McCabe's worries at the time.
It was the first time in my career I faced a disciplinary hearing.
A priest was arrested for child abuse, and there was a computer seized in the course of that investigation. And the priest was charged and went to jail. But the bishop then, some years later, requested the computer to be returned to the parish, and it couldn't be found.
Apparently, the exhibits officer had given it to me. Now I knew it wasn't given to me. It was never given to me. I knew nothing about it. I had no involvement in that case whatsoever. My name is nowhere near any of it.
I thought he was overreacting at the start. It really, really got to him.
I was ferociously worried because I knew if I was convicted of taking a computer, that would be headlines. Front page, Garda Whistleblower, found guilty of taking a computer in relation to a child abuse case. So I had to do all my own investigation in relation to it. I did everything.
And I can remember vividly the Sunday night that he left here. He said, I'm going to prove myself right, one way or another.
I met a person. The person knew all about this.
And they said, I know why you're here, Maurice. You've been set up for a computer and they're all laughing at you.
That night, Maurice McCabe was given paperwork from the Garda file on the missing computer. This would prove vital.
So the day came for the disciplinary hearing, and I fought my corner very well. I was cleared, completely cleared.
And only for he got the file and could prove himself innocent. They would have charged him. And it was at that stage that I realised what he was up against. I would have always thought we've had enough trouble just to leave it. But that didn't happen. From what I remember, some guard came to Maurice in Mullingar and said to him, look, I'm really annoyed. I stopped somebody for speeding, and I look now and it's been cancelled.
When I looked up the case, I could see that the inspector, he was from a different area, had terminated a number of cases for the same driver. That started me off. And I started to research.
We spent hours sifting through the pulse system, making notes of the extent of what was happening.
I printed off all the worst ones. There was a couple of speeds up there, 180, 190 kilometres. In a 100 zone, not even on a motorway. And they always got off.
It was just the scale of it. I think he was genuinely horrified at the extent. It was nothing to do with one person getting their points cancelled. Or Maurice would be the first person to say, oh yeah, don't worry about that, you know, in a genuine case.
We all use discretion. I used it. But this was senior officers going behind the backs of guards and terminating their tickets without even asking them. These were people that were caught 6, 7, 8 times. There's people being injured and killed every day. And behind it, we're saying, no, it's okay to do this for our friends and our family. And something had to be done about it.
Not believing that his concerns would be addressed within the force, Maurice McCabe looked outside. He contacted the Taoiseach and various ministers and TDs with his evidence. But it was when he met with Noel Brett of the Road Safety Authority that he felt he was getting somewhere.
He said to me, I kind of knew it was happening, but I had no proof or evidence of it, he said. But I gave it to him. He went home that night and rang the Transport Minister, Leo Varadkar.
After the minister was informed, the Garda Commissioner, Martin Callanan, ordered an internal inquiry into the penalty points issue.
Gardaí have appointed an assistant commissioner to investigate.
While that investigation was ongoing, the issue exploded into the public domain.
We have honest Gardaí out there who are being victimised because they've uncovered the system.
Sergeant McCabe and another Garda colleague, John Wilson, had briefed a number of politicians, including independent TDs Claire Daly and Mick Wallace.
Gardaí have approached me as a member of the Oireachtas and they're very concerned that honest Gardaí are being undermined by this activity.
Minister, Deputy Wallace's question.
After it was raised in the Dáil, it became a major news story.
Well, next to those serious allegations that a number of Gardaí interfered with the penalty point system by quashing some thousands of road traffic cases.
The allegations by a member of the Garda Síochána
points could be wiped from the record at the push of a button.
Officials have met with the person making those allegations.
But both men remained anonymous, referred to only as Garda whistleblowers.
From 2 unidentified Garda whistleblowers.
Well, just an hour and a half ago, the Department of Justice published the report by Assistant Garda Commissioner John O'Mahony into the quashing of penalty points. Now,
a few months later, the report, it was published. And I heard on the news, and I said, well, hold on here. I'm the one that's making a complaint. And yet he didn't even interview me or didn't even ring me.
The Assistant Commissioner has found no evidence that can induce to suggest any act of criminality, corruption, deception or falsification.
It was hard to listen to those news reports. The headlines were nothing to see here. This fella's a nut job.
I'm pleased to note that the serious allegations of criminality that were made, the serious allegations that there had been perversion of the course of justice, has been proved to be untrue.
Minister, I want you to go the extra mile. Be generous.
Then the Justice Minister said that I hadn't cooperated. Or John Wilson hadn't cooperated either.
Insofar as individuals who raised issues are alleging that the Garda reports published are untrue, let them bring forward the chapter and verse and proof of that. They didn't cooperate with the Garda investigations that took place.
But to listen to Alan Shatter in the Dáil, your heart sinks. Like, who's sitting at home in their kitchen watching the news thinks that this guy isn't a serious troublemaker? When you've the Minister for Justice saying that he didn't cooperate.
6 months later, Minister Shatter acknowledged to the Dáil that this statement was incorrect and apologised to the 2 whistleblowers if any upset had been caused.
Comptroller and Auditor General has published his investigation of public spending for last year. It includes
By then, 2 independent reports had raised questions about the O'Mahony report findings.
reports on how penalty points were dealt with, how much is owed.
One of these was by the Comptroller and Auditor General. Maurice McCabe had told him that the failure to collect fines was impacting on the public purse.
Inspector and above can terminate a fine, and there were 400.
This CNAG report confirmed that senior Gardaí were cancelling thousands of penalty points for what appeared to be spurious reasons.
For a long time, Maurice McCabe had been making it clear that there was an issue around penalty points. And as that began to gain momentum within the Oireachtas, to counter that, there was rumours circulating between members, the press, that he wasn't to be believed, he wasn't a credible character. I had to judge for myself about Maurice McCabe.
But I met him in Buzzwells with the dossier and with the evidence. He didn't do any talking. He just listened to me for about 20 minutes. And then he said to me, "Well, you're not mad. Or you're not bad." And I said, "Is that what they're saying about me?" He says, "It is."
The Public Accounts Committee decided to examine the penalty point system and the Comptroller and Auditor General's report. Garda Commissioner Martin Callanan was called before the committee to answer questions.
I was watching the Public Accounts Committee. Martin Callanan was being examined. Suddenly, he said about me and John Wilson, he said,
All of those things that are levelled against their fellow officers, frankly, I think it's quite disgusting. On a personal level, I think it's quite disgusting.
Disgusting. Wow. I knew I was finished in the guards after that. I did.
I can just remember it just like a heat going through you, just astonished. And just the venom in what he was saying and his whole demeanour, and to see his entourage around him, you know, all in their uniforms and like they were talking about my husband.
Why is it that no one can ring him and say, "Come in, you're a serving Garda, you're doing something that I don't agree with," and you described it as disgusting?
He was the Garda Commissioner. He was saying this. Every guard in the country and every senior officer, they heard this. And that was the way to go. This man, what he did, is disgusting.
The whistleblower asked to come before us, and we agreed that we would hear his evidence.
I am the accounting officer of An Garda Síochána. I am the person answerable to you. There are ample forums within An Garda Síochána if individuals have issues that they wish to highlight.
Okay, we'll draw the meeting to a close, and we want to thank you and your colleagues for being here with us.
But what Martin Callanan said privately after the hearing went much further than this.
Yeah, so after the meeting, we went across, shared some pleasantries, as you would do, and the Commissioner then began to tell the story about John Wilson, another whistleblower, in relation to an incident in Grafton Street. John Wilson turned up. There was individuals there with a horse, I think, and they were causing a bit of a disturbance. John Wilson, in the Commissioner's words, said that John Wilson pulled the knacker off the horse, took the horse himself, rode it back to the barracks and tied it to the railings. And the other fella fiddles with kids. And these are the type of fucking headbangers that I'm dealing with. I was very disturbed by it because here was the most senior person within the force telling me this. And I immediately began to think, had I made a mistake?
The following day, Martin Callanan phoned John McGuinness and asked to meet him.
We decided we would meet in a hotel on the Naas Road. When I arrived at the hotel, I parked in the car park. And as I was getting out to go to the hotel, the commissioner got out of his car and came around to my passenger door and sat in. So I presumed that we were going to have the meeting there and then. He then began to explain that Maurice McCabe was definitely not to be trusted. He was a man that had been involved in sexual abuse, including his own family members, and that there was an active file being prepared, and that I had made a grave error in relation to the information that I was taking from Maurice McCabe and giving to the Public Accounts Committee. In fact, when he was leaving the car, he reached across to me, caught me by the arm and said, "You're in real trouble, real trouble." It frightened the daylights out of me. I couldn't wait to get out of that car park, get on the road home, but the thoughts still ran through my head and worried me. It was almost hard to believe that he said some of these things to me. And I had to make my mind up over that weekend because the work was continuing at Public Accounts Committee. And I decided that weekend to trust Maurice McCabe.
In the next hour on Morning Ireland, the Garda Commissioner versus the Dáil Committee. Should Garda whistleblowers give public evidence to politicians without their boss's blessing? Also,
the serving member is adamant that he should give evidence before the Public Accounts Committee, but the Garda Commissioner may try to block such an appearance.
Despite the efforts of Martin Callanan to prevent Maurice McCabe from giving evidence to the Public Accounts Committee, the hearing went ahead.
I think it was only the night before the actual hearing that he got definite word that he was going to be heard.
The Dáil Public Accounts Committee has agreed to invite a serving Garda who claims there have been abuses of...
Both Maurice and I had decided that because he had never been seen in the public or a photograph or nothing had ever been taken of him, that he would really have preferred, if he could, to go in a back door.
A TD offered to smuggle me in the gates. I rang my father to say that I was getting a lift in and I was going to wear a hoodie over my head so I wouldn't be recognised.
And then the morning before Maurice's father came in, he said, "I'm not happy. You're going in like a criminal undercover." He said, "You've done nothing wrong." He said, "Hold your head up high." And he was right.
Sergeant Maurice McCabe, would you be happy if a transcript of your evidence today is given to the PAC committee?
I would.
When he was turning in, what hit a note with me is just that he was just such like a small fish in that big pond.
This afternoon, Sergeant Maurice McCabe arrived at Leinster House to give his evidence in court.
I got dropped off from my sister down a side street, and then I just walked to the Dáil, and I've never did before, and I didn't know where I was going. I was nervous. So I went in, and it was in private. I found them all great. They asked me a lot of questions. I was able to answer them all. And I was just able to say to them that unless it stops now, it's going to continue and continue. I left the Dáil. And I got into my sister's car. Took off.
He was just thrilled. He felt really good in himself coming out of that meeting. He felt he was heard, he felt he was believed.
Oh God, little did I know it was going to be worse. Worse and worse and worse. He told me that he destroyed me and that he was ordered to do it.
And when he would go out, and if he wouldn't answer the phone, I would be afraid that there was something wrong, something had happened, or that.
It was a letter from Tusla accusing me of raping a child.